Hello, thanks for joining the Fuqua School of Business today on LinkedIn Live. I'm Jamie Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation and an Associate Professor of the Practice of Management at Fuqua. I'm excited to chat with all of you today about what it takes for startups and even large established businesses, for that matter, to survive and thrive during periods of rapid change. First, a couple housekeeping items. This is one part of a series. And so if you find this interesting, tune in every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time to hear insights on current events from Fuqua faculty. And I encourage you to also follow Fuqua on LinkedIn so you can get notification when these events begin. During today's session, I'm going to spend about 15 minutes outlining 4 models for how startups are exploring new revenue streams during the pandemic. And for each of those, we're going to talk through some specific examples to really bring them to life. Then we'll transition and open the floor for questions. So if questions emerge while I'm sharing the different models, please add them to the chat box, and I'll be happy to address them toward the end of the conversation today. By way of background, I have supported both startups and large firms in building and launching new businesses. I co-founded Impact Engine, which is an investment firm that optimizes both financial and social returns. And several of the examples that I'm going to share today come from our portfolio companies. I'm also a managing partner at Flywheel Innovation, where I've worked with Fortune 500 firms to develop innovation management practices and grow through innovation. And today, I'm going to pull from both of these experiences to really talk about how being agile and responsive in a dynamic environment is essential. And it can mean the difference between your business surviving and thriving or withering on the vine. For startups, it's absolutely critical that they're able to respond to their customers and their environment rapidly, because that's the difference between being in business in 6 months or having to close their doors. For large established firms, the timeline may be a little bit longer, but the ability to remain competitive is still the difference between existence and demise. And I'm sure many of you have heard of small and large firms that are transitioning their production lines to produce essential goods, such as personal protective equipment or sanitizer. And these are really great examples of being agile and serving an immediate need. But today, we're going to focus our conversation on models that showcase how startups have reflected on their strengths and assets and found new ways to drive revenue that extend beyond addressing short-term shortages. Now, for some lucky startups, the pandemic has been a catalyst for their growth. So startups in the area of remote healthcare and last mile logistics have had gasoline thrown on their fires. But other startups and established firms haven't been as lucky. They've been negatively affected by the shifts in consumer behavior patterns that were created by the pandemic and stay-at-home orders. And so if that was you or that was your firm, then your best option is to start looking for new sources of revenue. And that could come in the form of changing the products or solutions that you're delivering, changing how you're serving your customers, changing which customers you are serving, or changing how you are reaching and connecting with and providing your solution to customers. And so as we talk through this, I want to share with you a framework, and we will use that to talk through different models. And so I'm going to pause for a second and pull our framework up. And you'll see in the framework, there are 4 models for us to consider. The first is that you can change your solution to serve a new need of your same customer. So same customer, new solution, and that's moving to the right. Or you can take your same solution and product and find a new customer who now has that need. And you'll see that represented by moving up. You can shift your assets to serve a new market with a new solution, which you'll see in the top right-hand corner. And you can also find a new way to reach your same customers who still have that same need that you were addressing. And you'll see that represented by the entrance from the left. So let's stop and really start to have some conversation around examples. They can provide some inspiration for how firms are thinking about addressing these challenges. Everlywell is an Austin-based medical device provider that makes more than 30 at-home health test kits. And when COVID initially hit, they thought testing would be effectively handled by traditional actors like government and healthcare service providers. However, that proved not to be the case, and so they launched into action to try to identify a COVID-19 test. They developed a test in just 13 days. And while they've not yet been granted permission by the FDA to sell the test for at-home use, their tests are being used on frontline workers, and their end goal remains the same: serve their original customers with a new product offering. Other startups have had opportunities emerge for their products to serve new customers, and BookNook is an example of that. BookNook is an education technology company that allows students to read along to an adult guide or peer. And the BookNook platform provides tools that will walk the guides through how to score and assess the reading as the student reads. And prior to COVID, BookNook sold directly to school systems and after-school programs. But as COVID sent students into a virtual learning environment, BookNook saw an opportunity to also begin selling to parents who have now turned teachers, right? And I know many of you out there today probably face that exact challenge, right? Of your kids coming home and suddenly you also were not just mom and dad, but also teacher. And this cloud-based solution is a perfect fit for parents looking to supplement their children's at-home learning. And while BookNook continues to sell to schools and supplemental programs, this was a great way for them to take an existing product they had and start to use it to address a new customer whose needs rapidly emerged and were very acute with their existing product. GoNanny is a startup that was part of Techstars 2020 Chicago cohort. And they're really interesting. They had built a platform that would allow parents to schedule childcare providers to provide rides, transportation, drop-offs and pickups for their children. So think about it, right? You're a parent, you've got an 8-year-old. It is very unlikely you're going to schedule a random Uber to come pick your child up and drop them off at soccer practice. But who do you trust? You trust childcare professionals who are trained, certified, and equipped to work safely with children. And who's interested in earning more money? Those same childcare professionals. So GoNanny was establishing great traction, really starting to connect healthcare, childcare providers with parents who needed additional transportation assistance for their children. But schools were halted, well, schools were closed and after school activities were halted, and we all started to pause, and suddenly, that need no longer existed in the marketplace. So what did GoNanny do? They reflected on their assets. What did they have? What were their strengths? What had they built? And they had built a strong logistics platform. So they looked around in the changing environment and said, who needs a quick implementation of a logistics platform? Well, the answer to that is restaurants, and particularly restaurants that had not yet signed up for a partnership with DoorDash or Uber Eats. And in Chicago, those were primarily high-end restaurants. And then who needed jobs? Well, the wait staff at these very same restaurants. And so you can see the analog between what GoNanny, the market that GoNanny intentionally set out to serve, and the restaurant market that they have quickly activated to begin serving. This allowed them to leverage their existing assets, which were the logistics platform, to serve a new set of customers, these high-end restaurants. And so let's look at a second example in this same model. And it's not from a startup at all, because I want to talk about the broad applicability of this approach. It's actually a small business in Texas called AK Wetworks. And AK Wetworks owns high pressure cleaning equipment, and they would use it to clean industrial goods and equipment, including oil pipelines and things like that. And as COVID hit and oil prices simultaneously tanked, AK Wetworks needed to think fast. How could they use the assets that they had to meet a real and immediate need? They worked with a sanitizer solution producer to actually create a customized solution and formulation that would work in the equipment that they had. And so within a few weeks, they were actually able to build a system that would allow them to go in and disinfect an entire room of surfaces within minutes, leveraging the equipment that they already had access to. And so with both GoNanny and AK Wetworks, they leveraged their existing assets. In the case of GoNanny, it was the logistics platform. And in the case of AK Wetworks, it was their specialized equipment to create a new solution for a new customer. For some startups, their customers are still saddled with the same pain points, but social distancing and implementation of stay-at-home orders has restricted how they can reach and interact with their customers. So let's look at Fixer. Fixer is a startup that specifically seeks to train underrepresented individuals in the construction trades so they can become electricians or plumbers, for example. And as a homeowner, you can book basic repair services through the Fixer platform, and they'll send out a trained fixer to service your repair. However, as we became more cautious about people entering our home, Fixer had to consider an alternative way of providing a similar product to their same customers. And they needed to use a different channel because, going into people's home was no longer an option. So what you can do now is a DIY project. You can book a fixer to walk you through and consult on your own home repair. Want to replace your garbage disposal? No problem. You schedule an appointment with Fixer, and when your appointed time comes, you log in and turn on your video, and together, you and the Fixer work on addressing the repair that's in front of you. And what I love most about this switch that Fixer has made is that it really may open up an entirely new revenue line that will remain in place post-COVID. And I say this because on numerous occasions, I have called my brother-in-law, who is a general contractor, for a video consult, asking him questions like, I can't understand why the picture of the wiring for my ceiling fan doesn't match any of the wires in my house. Can you please help me? And so I know many of you have probably been in a similar situation and could have used a consult. In addition, one of the interesting pieces is Fixer, by taking this model of remote connection, it's allowed them to actually enter new geographic markets much faster than they otherwise would have been able to do. They don't have to have trained fixers in the market because people aren't in the same physical location. And so it's allowed them to expand even more rapidly than they were planning. And in the same model, Copper Cow Coffee is another example I want to share. And it's a coffee startup that brings high quality Vietnamese coffee straight to your cup. And prior to COVID, they were growing rapidly, selling to offices who wanted to offer their employees and visitors, a unique coffee option while they were on campus. But as offices closed and everyone migrated to work from home, Copper Cow Coffee had to make a quick transition to focus on how are they going to reach the coffee drinkers directly? So they ramped up their online sales option and the logistics to be able to ship out to individual homes. And as it turns out, when we're stuck at home all day and we're trying to be employee, educator, parent, we do want some variety in our caffeine consumption options. And so their quick action has actually led to a growth in the direct-to-consumer revenue stream for Copper Cow Coffee. Both Fixer and Copper Cow Coffee are really great examples of taking your existing solution and with a small modification, serving your same customers, but through a different channel, online instead of in person. And I continue to monitor the landscape for new examples of startups that are creating revenue streams during the pandemic. And I'd love to hear from each of you. So if there's things that you've seen, examples that you've seen, or your company has done something really interesting, please share it in the chat. And I would love for us to talk about it at the conclusion of this session today. It'd be great to really explore those new examples together. So before I pause to take questions, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. As a business leader, as a startup CEO, I encourage you to start to think about, what your next steps are going to be in this dynamic environment. How are you going to create new revenue streams? And so I would encourage you to ask the following 4 questions. How can you reach your current customers through different channels? What new needs do your current customers have that you could address? Are there new customers that now need your solution? And what assets, both physical and human, could be deployed to address a pressing problem, perhaps a new one that's emerged through the pandemic? And so with that, I'm going to pause and look to the chat for questions or comments, or if you want to share some specific examples, I would love to be able to highlight those as well. So one of the first questions that popped up is, so you've given a lot of examples of startups, but does this actually apply to large corporations as well? And I would posit the answer to that is yes, because at the end of the day, what you're looking to do as a business is to find a specific need and use your assets and resources to create a solution that addresses that need in such a way that your customers will pay for it. And so really thinking about, again, reflecting back to what your assets are and how are you going to either use them to create a new product, use them to reach a new customer, or perhaps reach your customer in a new way, is relevant for startups as well as established firms. Another question that's popped up is, can you offer some more examples of how companies are being creative in their products to customers are being creative in getting their products to customers due to COVID? Sure, I think there's we've all seen a lot of examples, particularly not just in startups, but in our small businesses. And I want to share some of the examples there, because I think the small businesses have had to be really thoughtful about how to be resilient and how to be agile in this dynamic environment. And so an example in town here in Durham would be one of my favorite watering holes when they were no longer allowed to have people in store or in the location consuming beverages. They actually became a channel for the local farmers, and because the farmers markets were also shut down. And so now I can go to where I used to go for a nice frothy beverage and actually purchase eggs direct from the farm. As well as other goods and supplies like leafy greens and other things that I would have gotten, or cheese that I would have gotten at the farmer's market, which is not active. And I find this to be really interesting. It's a win-win. So the local small business who has a physical retail location is obviously creating a new product that they're selling, but they're also serving as a channel for the farmers who were previously selling at the farmer's market. And so I found that to be a really creative solution for a local small business. I have any tips for startups in getting some of these new ideas and products funded? Yeah, it's an interesting time for the funding environment right now. A lot of funders are thinking very critically, and perhaps are not as willing to take on new investments as they were prior to COVID. I think it's still a matter of time till we see how the funding and financing shakes out for startups, given the level of uncertainty that we're experiencing. But if you want to get funded, and the best thing that you can do is demonstrate traction. And the best way to demonstrate traction is to have sales. And so I encourage you to just really try something new, get it in front of the customers, and see if you can get them to buy it. Because there's nothing like traction to really to drive investors to want to place their capital in you. And so really taking that leap of faith. And I think what's interesting right now is on the consumer side, the customer side, I think customers and consumers are really willing to offer a lot of grace in the sense that you can try something new, and if it doesn't work, then unlike previously, it may not be as disruptive to your brand. I think everyone knows that we're all trying to figure this out, and I see a big window of opportunity to take bold risk, calculated risk, and try something new that you might not have otherwise tried. Got another question coming in. New ideas may not come as easily for some firms right now. How can firms encourage creativity and innovation and support the sharing of new ideas? I love that. And I think this is actually a great time to be looking for new opportunities. For those of you who are practitioners of the design thinking methodology, we talk about extreme users and how extreme users have very acute needs. And we are all at this point, with our shifting environment and going into new roles and new work environments, feeling pain points differently, and perhaps feeling pain points more acutely. And so I think this is a great time to really to engage your workforce, to engage your talent base in understanding the problems and needs and pain points that they feel, but starting to explore that with your customers. Because your customers are feeling that too. And perhaps when you understand that and you build that empathy to really to understand what their pain points are, then that creates and will trigger opportunities for you to go develop new products and solutions that can meet their needs. I see another question around funding. I have some. What does funding look like in this landscape now for startups for funding with economic instability? So I guess the question's around, are we seeing shifts in funding? And certainly there's been a little bit of slowing of investment. I think it's a question of will we see that continue or not? And I don't think any of us truly know. I do think that many investors have especially early on, paused for a moment and held back some capital in order to invest in or continue to provide a bridge for their existing investments versus placing capital into new investments. However, whether that continues for months to come, I think is a bit uncertain. I do think there are investors out there who are looking for brilliant new opportunities and ideas, because they know that the world has probably in some ways forever changed, or has changed at least for a long time. And we have new needs that have emerged, and there are going to be startups that are successful in addressing that. And so I think it's a great time to be exploring and to be really trying out something new, because if you have a great idea and can demonstrate traction, you should be able to find capital. Do you think it always takes a crisis to be more innovative? I love this question. I don't think it always takes a crisis, but I think there's nothing better than a crisis to force us to all reevaluate and think differently about what we're doing. I think this is again, going back to the point I made earlier, which is, pain points become really acute during a crisis. New needs emerge. And this is a great time to raise your head up and look around and question and say, where are those pain points, and what are the unique assets that I bring to be able to address those problems in an interesting way. And so I think crises are a great time to look around and to look for new opportunities to innovate and to found companies. I have another question from, what is the funding percentages that you're seeing privately compared to SBA loan option? How does the funding percentages that you see privately compare to SBA loan options? Brian, to be frank, I'm not really equipped to answer that question, so I'm going to punt on that one, but I'll ask some of my colleagues and maybe dig around and follow up after this session. So thanks for posing that question, but not really in my wheelhouse. Do you see large corporations looking out for opportunities and solutions to convert fixed costs to variable costs at these times? Great question, Vinay. That's a great question. And the answer to that is 100% yes. So large companies are when they're thinking about their innovation right now, The conversion from fixed cost to variable cost, certainly part of it. The other piece of it is they are looking for startups and other innovations that they can bring in-house that will serve for cost cutting. As we transition, or as we continue to confront what's going to be our economic crisis that is looming, every single company is thinking about how can they cut costs. And so many of them are specifically looking externally for potential solutions to bring in that cut costs across different lines of the business, both in terms of how the business operates and performs, as well as in-house in technology-based solutions. And so we are hearing that and seeing that from the clients that we serve. Terrific. Any more questions? If not, we will wrap up today's session. I do want to say that if you've enjoyed the session today and found the conversation stimulating, then I hope you will follow the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation's LinkedIn page. We frequently curate content related to innovation and entrepreneurship topics that might be of interest to you, and would love to be able to share that and engage with you there. I personally hope that all of you find new ways to thrive in this brave new world. I think opportunities are out there, ready to be grasped. So be bold and really go out there and try to be the person who solves some of those big problems through entrepreneurial activity. Next week, you'll have an opportunity to hear from my colleague, Professor Victor Bennett, who will be discussing automation and our lives pre and post-COVID. I hope you'll tune in at the same time next week to hear from Professor Bennett. I'm confident he will be very engaging, and you will love to learn how he's thinking about strategy and specifically as it relates to automation. And finally, please make certain to follow Fuqua on LinkedIn so that you get alerts when these live streams begin. And if there's any questions, please let me know. And I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your week.